For many years now, Russ and Craig have had many wide-ranging conversations with folks from all over the gaming world. This is one of those conversations.
D6G, the Lost Chapter. So, Craig, that new the blueberry cronut thing. There's not enough blueberry in it. I'm gonna be honest. I'm not feeling it either. Hey, is that?
I wonder. Yeah,
is that Sam? Sam, how you doing, man? What brings you to Dunkin Donuts today?
Hi.
Hey, what are you doing in Dunks today?
Well, this is, I don't know if you guys knew, this is actually one of the kosher Dunkin Donuts.
Are those new and upcoming, or are there only a few left?
You know, there's more and more.
Cool.
Not all of them yet, unfortunately, but some. So
good. So what are some of your favorite kosher treats here?
Cronuts, I'm a big fan of.
Cronut. Yeah. See, those are really good.
French crullers, I'm a big fan of.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Classic.
So for those who don't know Sam, give us a little brief, real quick thing before we get you on the main show here. Like, what do you like about gaming? What got you into it and get you really engaged with it?
What got me engaged with gaming? I've been gaming since I was a wee lad. And I'll give. I was involved in mostly Magic the Gathering as a young kid, and some other stuff as I got older. And I'll give my wife and her family some credit for really getting me into board games. But I actually use a lot of board games professionally in my work as a youth group advisor. We play a lot of games with the kids. So
that's awesome. We're going to talk more about that on the main show with Sam here, and how you get games into your youth group. That's fantastic. But I thought it'd be kind of fun, and Craig, I know you were really excited to talk about this. Really talk about how games can appeal to special interests or specific interests. So, Sam, I know you've had a lot of success with your youth group with your Orthodox Jews. How did that go out? How did that come about?
Right. So a lot of people don't. What you don't know or may not know about Orthodox Jews is so our Sabbath, which we call Shabbos, from Friday night till Saturday night, we don't use any sort of electronics, driving cars, no computers, no internet, no TV. So for people looking for entertainment in that type of situation, books are a great option. And if you're looking to do something interactive with other people, board games are a really great option. And so I was actually a gamer before I was Orthodox. I didn't grow up Orthodox. But as I came into the Orthodox community, I saw more and more people really, being natural fits to learn about better games than they were already playing. And I could bring those games that I knew about to them. And also saw that some people who you might not have guessed otherwise were already into gaming because there was this sort of natural fit as a thing to do.
That's really cool. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in the main show, about how specifically Sam got it working in his groups. That's really cool. And it got me thinking, Sam, when you were talking about this, are there kind of games that you can, I think the idea of board games in general with your group makes a lot of sense because you have this time window where other sorts of activities are restricted and board games are sort of like a perfect fit. And then I got thinking about, and you mentioned this, is there other categories where specific board games, specific themes, or specific types of board games would be a perfect fit? And I know, Craig, you've talked about it a lot on the show where you find with, when you're covering specific topics in your classes or maybe doing specific things in theater, that certain games really just come in nicely. You've talked about when you're covering Rome, doing specific Rome games, maybe gladiatorial combat, things like that, where people can kind of appreciate some of the things that happened. Is that something you find, does it make these topics more engaging for the kids?
Well, I mean, games are really central to a lot of theater training, so it's sort of a natural instinct to fold that over. I mean, lots of like improvisational games, charades, and things like that are a real foundation for most kids who might not have more experience on an actual traditional stage, but they get that experience getting up in front of people and performing in front of people with those kinds of games. And so I can segue from that into, for instance, my Roman naval combat game, which has absolutely no intellectual value whatsoever. But by the time we're done with that, they go, oh, yeah, those Romans, their theater was like absolutely not intellectual whatsoever. And so it's a fun way to kind of pick one element of the lesson and kind of underscore it in a fun game scenario that gives them something to do. And that one also has sort of arts and crafts component that keeps them busy for a day. But for the most part, it's a fun game that when they come away, they remember, oh, and we killed Mr. Gallant like the first round. It was great. But when you think, oh, and guys, like what was their, what Roman theater was, what was all about? It was like, oh, violence and comedy. That's all they did. Yeah, yay, win.
Very cool. And so it's really basically based on kind of like finding those themes and matching them to those time periods and those events, right?
Mm.
And I there's been a couple like that for me too. Like I really think about like with my kids, right, when they're in school and they're studying mythos in particular. Like I remember when I was a kid and we got to like some of the other myths, like you got to like other myths and other religions, right? Like you got to the Norse mythos and you got to the Greek myths. And then I was playing Dungeons and Dragons at that time, and all of a sudden having the source material and realizing that, everybody knows who Thor is, but at that time, like Loki wasn't that well known. So unless you go and look, now he is because of Marvel, right? But back then, unless you really read the D&D books, you're like, oh wow, my teacher's talking about this, what I thought was an obscure, wait, there's history behind, like this is sort of real myths. There's real myths in my game. What? So I kind of came at it backwards, but at the same time, like with my kids now, I find that when they study these things in school, they get really engaged with any game that has it in there. Like they fell in love with High Heavens because this is a game that has like 3 different major mythos. And what's cool about this is each of the gods is a playing piece and as a card, and each of those cards has a little bit of background on the god that ties back to the god's abilities. And my kids were like analyzing, going, yeah, they really nailed how Hermes works, or they really nailed how, and they know some of the more obscure ones because they're learning about them, or they tie them into other reading they're doing, like they tie it into Percy Jackson and other things. And so all of a sudden they're getting much more engaged with the game, and the game's kind of bringing that stuff to life. So I think there's always an opportunity to find a game that matches not just the interests of your kid or your group, but also to drive it to kind of help them learn more about that stuff.
The interests are that you bring up are, it's interesting. I mostly, when I work with my youth group kids, as we'll talk about, I use a lot of shorter games. Mm-hmm. We don't get to play really chunky stuff, but occasionally someone will look in my collection and see something and they just zone in on it and say, I'm really into this thing. I have to play that game. And so I had a bunch of kids who were really into Hamilton. And they saw Founding Fathers in my collection, and they were just like, I need to play Founding Fathers. And then wound up sitting there reading through the history section in the rule book for, a half an hour after they were done the game.
See, that is awesome on so many levels. It's awesome that A, Hamilton's inspiring people to learn more about American history, and B, it's awesome that Founding Fathers is sitting there, and now all of a sudden that game is exciting. I think Founding Fathers is such a fantastic game because it's really, really fun to play. And B, they've done a really good job of weaving in the learning while you're, reading the cards when you have downtime and playing your turns out. I think that's
the fact that there was actual history on the cards.
Yeah, right.
And that you could be. I mean, I'm not nearly as into American history as my wife is. Mm-hmm. But she grew up on the West Coast. I grew up in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. So we went to Independence Hall every year for a school trip. I was like burned out on American history. Right. But Founding Fathers really, taught me more about the Constitutional Convention than I ever learned having grown up in Philadelphia.
Right.
And did it in a fun way. And I see that it does that even, with teenagers. And that's an amazing thing for a game to be able to do. There's
a great story of that game in our local gaming group. So one of our gaming friends, his distant relative was one of the folks involved with the signing of the Constitution and the Constitutional Convention. And so he had... his distant relative is in the game. He's a card. He got like freaked out. I was like, "Oh my God, he's in here!" It was awesome. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. And I think again, those games just bring that stuff to life and make it more real. I think here's sort of a weird example. So, I in my real life, in my day job, I am a product manager, and one of the big things product managers do is we're all about process optimization and figuring out how to do things better and, helping engineers optimize and all that kind of stuff. And so in that world, there's something called Kanban, which is a methodology, right? It's a methodology to improve process. And so when Stronghold Games released the game called Kanban, which, and by the way, some of the first Kanban comes originally from Lean, and I'm going to get all geeky here, but it comes from Lean, which comes from a process that really, when Japan sort of came over to the United States and really started blowing us away in the auto industry, it's because they figured out how to manufacture cars extremely efficiently. And so Toyota and other companies really figured this out and led with Lean, and they led with Kanban as a methodology. So Stronghold Games released a game called Kanban, which when you look at it, it looks like, oh, it's a game, and it is, a game themed around building cars. But it's actually a game themed around the process, the Kanban process of building cars. And when you're trying to teach or explain to your team what Kanban is and what's valuable in the Kanban process, this is an interesting game. Now, the only downside of this game is it's extremely heavy. So it's not really good for non-gamers. I'd love a more lean version of Kanban.
Kanban, the dice game.
Kanban, the optimized value stream game. But it's really it's a really cool idea. And what I do find with it is many of my engineering friends at our company are gamers, and so if you bring this out, they find the fun in it. So, but I think it's a really interesting game. And there's other games like that with process optimization, like. Panama is sort of a similar idea where you're trying to optimize process. And so if you're trying to work with teams, do team building around this kind of thing, there are quite a few games out there that maybe not quite so blatantly as Kanban, but do help you do that process, that problem-solving process, which I really like. Mm-hmm. Sam, what's some other examples you have there? You have Kings of Israel there.
Have either of you guys ever heard of the game Kings of Israel?
I have not. Tell me about it.
So it was a Kickstarter game. Mm-hmm. I don't remember the name of the designer off the top of my head. It's akin to Pandemic. Mm-hmm. It's a full co-op game, and when you play it, you're like, oh, this is a little bit like Pandemic. I think it's different enough that it's worth having both. We have both. Yeah. But just on theme, I kickstarted it, and it is I couldn't have imagined a more appropriate theme for my youth group kids to try and jump into a co-op game. You're all prophets in ancient Israel, trying to remove sin from the land of Israel amidst the wicked kings that they have. And typically, religious-oriented games are awful. That's just, I think that's most people's experience who've played them. They're just not very good games. They're usually, thinly veiled reskins or poor, roll and move games or something like that. There's not much there. This is a real game. And there's real authentic Jewish history in there. And to be able to present that to my youth group kids, even if they weren't looking to learn the names of the prophets or the names of the kings, and they may not really be learning from it, the fact that that's such a specific theme that hit so close to home for them, was like, you could see them really just tune into that and be like, wow, someone really made this game. I can't let me learn more about it. And there was a brilliant decision there, is that it was a pure co-op game, because there's often like the question of, so someone asked me one time, like, well, would you like a battle game between the Jews leaving Egypt and the Egyptians, have like a battle game? And like, well, who wants to be the Egyptians trying to oppress the Jews and keep them in Egypt? That's like, it's a very difficult, like, who wants to be the false prophet, spreading sin, or that's like that. Yeah, that's a hard sell. But by designing it as a pure co-op game, it presented this opportunity for everyone to be on that side and really, tuning into something like that, which I thought was a really cool thing.
That's very cool. I have another semi-history one, but this one works, I think, with it's kind of like in the vein of Founding Fathers. Sam, have you played Legends of the American Frontier? I
heard the review.
Yeah.
I am dying to. This is one of those games that's a little too meaty for me to likely get to the table so I tend not to.
I don't think it's much meatier than Founding Fathers. So,
okay.
If you can get through Founding Fathers, I think this will be at the same level. Craig, I don't know what you think. I know you play it with me, but what I like about
it's at least maybe it's a little more complicated. I don't know,
but I feel like it's in the same ballpark. But what I like about it is, so it's not like the history is not quite as as baked in as Founding Fathers, right? But the process of the expansion of the expansion to the West during the United States during this time period is really well captured, right? You can kind of build a frontiersman like the Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone type. You can build sort of like the banker, East Coast banker wealth type, or something in the middle, right? And some of it's like tall tales, but you kind of see where the tall tales come. And what's really cool is you're building a story of your character, of their life. And the events they have, while it's not an actual historical figure, you're seeing it all and referencing and understanding some of the things that happen. Like there's the gold rush things that happen, and there's the settling thing, and then there's the Native American attacks, and how do you deal with that, and all those other things. And it's really a very interesting, the whole process is really interesting, and it really kind of gets you close to that. And it's another kind of an example, kind of like the High Heavens example I gave, where if your kids or whoever you work with is learning about this stuff, it makes the game that much more engaging, because you're like, oh yeah, I'm like Daniel Boone, or I'm like this person. And so I think it's really a pretty interesting way to do that and kind of see, and it's got great art and all that kind of theme comes through too, and really brings you into that period.
That's really cool. I actually, I one time met a guy who was actually an Orthodox Jewish guy when I was in Indianapolis,
Mm-hmm.
and he was there. He was visiting, staying for a while. He was doing a job costing. He was trying to project the cost on a project to build gigantic supercapacitors
Mm-hmm.
to store all this free electricity from the wind farms in northern Indiana,
Oh yeah.
and see whether it was going to be worth building it to resell that electricity. And so I asked him, I said, you ever play board games? He said, no. I said, you ever hear this game called Power Grid? He said, no. So I started telling him about Power Grid, and he said, that's my job exactly, and I wanted to play that game.
That's awesome. That's very cool, and that's another good example of that, right? So it's interesting, because it's what I find fascinating about these is how sometimes some of these games really nail the essence of what you're trying to do, and Power Grid's a great example of that, of how it really gets down to the essence of how do you efficiently power this area and still make money at it, right? How do you become profitable at it?
Right.
Very cool. Oh, I have another one. Have you played Penny Press?
No.
This is another really good one. So Penny Press is really themed after the newspaper business back when there was penny papers. So it's early, I want to say like industrial era newspaper printing. And what's interesting about the theme here is this one is exactly, you will definitely have a Founding Fathers feel for this in terms of how about the same level of play and level of complexity. So if you like Founding Fathers, I think you'll love Penny Press. And what's really cool about it is each player is trying to build the optimal front page for their newspaper and to get it to sell the most. And what's interesting is so you're kind of running with stories. And as one player starts to run with the story, another player will, that if you can jump on the same bandwagon, like let's say you're running with a story, it's about politics and there's a big political scandal, and it'll come up and there'll be a tile that sort of says that. And it's a certain shape and size. And so there's a couple things going on here at once. First of all, when that category becomes a big deal, like let's say you think about something in the past like Watergate, right? If Watergate's a big story, everybody's going to want to run with it. But once a couple of the big players have broken the main story, it becomes less valuable for other players to do it later. So there's this moment when a story first breaks that you want to be in, but if you get to it too late, now all of a sudden there's less value. And the second part of it is you want enough of the story that it fits the right area and shape of your front page. So you're actually literally building the layout of your front page of your paper while you're also trying to get optimal combinations of icons, which basically represent the different kinds of stories currently running and the ones of most value. So it might be one round, politics might be the most valuable. The next round, a disaster story might be the most valuable. The round of that, it could be some special interest story that's more valuable. And so you kind of find the right combinations, and then you try to, then each round, based on how well you built your paper for that round and how the right combinations of stories, you get a certain amount of money. And of course, the player at the end with the most of that stuff wins. But there's this really interesting bidding mechanic, and again, I love the idea of bringing the tiles together. Really gets you feel like it gives you the sort of almost a tactile feel of doing typesetting, which is exactly sort of how that era was, right? Back when you had manual typesets and laying on the page. So I really found it to be fascinating and really got me thinking about that era in time. And again, if you're someone who is really interested in news coverage or that era in history, because what's also fun about it is a lot of the story references kind of tie back. There's little fun story titles they tie back to, like the disaster is referencing obviously the Titanic or something similar, and it's a lot of fun too. So I think that's another neat one that sort of falls into that history category, kind of like Founding Fathers.
I feel like history is a particularly rich sort of category for bringing in real educational themes because it's so easy to learn historical events through the course of a game.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, agreed. And although I do think there's there's not as many of them, but I think science and math might have a few winners in there too. One of the ones, one of my personal favorites, and this might be cheating, is the New Science, which was a sponsor of the show for a while. What I like about the New Science is it's kind of a history game, but it's also a science game at the same time. And Sam, have you ever played the New Science?
I've heard many of your promotions for it.
So you know the basics of it. So I won't repeat the whole promotion here, but the idea of it is you're basically playing major historical scientists and you're trying to research and do discoveries, but do you leverage other people's discoveries? And the pattern of these discoveries and the names of the discoveries mirror great discoveries in science. And what you're changing really is, did Tesla really discover these things about electricity first, or now are you going to have it in your history version? Did someone else, did Kelvin do it? That kind of thing. So there's these little anachronisms, but basically you learn about the big chunks, and the science is divided into categories. So there's sort of like, astronomy discoveries, and there's physics discoveries, and there's these different other categories. And so you're kind of learning about all that as well. And yes, it's a historical game, but it's much more about how the scientific process works, because you're really like, one of the big chunks of the game and the core mechanics of the game is, if Craig researches something, does he publish now to get some fame about it? But by publishing his work, he now allows Sam, you can leverage that work to make a bigger discovery, which is how science really works, right? Scientist A discovers something like, oh my God, the Earth's actually round. And then scientist B discovers, well, that means that everything's traveling in orbits, right, or something.
Right.
So, and he sort of leverages it, but maybe the second guy becomes more famous than the first guy. Or do you not publish it, trying to get to the second discovery before somebody else does, but by doing that, someone else gets to the first discovery first, right, or beats you to the punch on publishing the paper. So it's kind of got the whole publish-or-perish thing going on. That's a part of science. It's got the whole discovery and building other people's work part of science. And then, of course, there's the actual scientific discoveries and learning the history of actual science as well. So there's a lot going on in that one that I really, really like.
That's really cool. I don't know as many board games. That's a good example. I don't know as many board games that really deal with real science, but there's a ton that deal with math.
Oh, yeah. Give some examples of math ones.
Well, I mean, just ones that I've seen in math classrooms, just to really just get basic principles across. One is I see the game Set all the time. You guys know Set?
Go ahead and describe it. I played it a few times, yeah.
So you have these cards that have 4 different characteristics: shape, number, color, and shading. And you deal out a grid of 12 of them, and you're looking for a set of 3 cards where every characteristic is all the same or all different. And there's a lot of math sort of built in figuring out like where the sets should be, and now that I've eliminated these 2 things, what am I looking for this next card, and what are the chances that it's coming up? And it's a very visual recognition kind of thing. But I see math teachers love that game, and the best game to try and illustrate basic probability that I've ever seen is Can't Stop. You ever play Can't Stop?
Yes.
Classic game. I cannot tell you how many people don't understand how probabilities on dice work until they play that game.
Yes.
And then that's like it. And then, oh, now I get it. And now I know why not to play craps. But that's a real classic for math teachers.
This is kind of a stretch, but Camel Up will teach you why not to bet on horses. Just saying. Yeah, that's a really good one, actually. And you're right, though. There's not a lot. I think there's quite a few good math games. There's also quite a few games that aren't math games, but being good and fast at math is very helpful, right? And good at probabilities is very helpful. So there's quite a few games where you can sort of think of that through. I think also there's quite a few good teamwork games. You think about cooperative games for a minute. You can think about quite a few cooperative games that really require people to work together. Craig, one thing I thought would be good, and I can't think of too many. Can you think of any games that really support literature? It's a tough one. Other than like specific, like, I guess a game.
There are some games that are like focused specifically on things like Shakespeare quotes.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, right.
And things like that. I can't remember any by name, but I know there are at least 2 that I have used in the past.
Is there the Bill Shakespeare's Dead game?
Right.
That sounds familiar. What is that?
I think it was like an apples to apples type game with like Shakespeare titles or something.
Yeah.
I think it was on Kickstarter. I don't know much more about it.
I'm trying to remember that one now.
Bill Shakespeare is dead on Board Game Geek. So it does exist.
Yeah, I can't think of it too many. There's a couple. Let's see. Smirk and Dagger has the Raven game. I'm forgetting the full name of it now, but that actually is a tribute to Edgar Allan Poe. So that's something. But it's very. The tributes to Poe are all subtle references in the cards to his various works. Right?
I'll tell you a great literature game that my wife and I have actually been playing a lot recently is Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective.
Ooh, tell us about that one.
So Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is it was way ahead of its time. Games like Pandemic Legacy and Time Stories, these really deep story-driven games.
Yeah.
This game came out in like 1987.
Oh wow!
And it comes in, and now it comes in a box edition. They reprinted it finally, but I think it comes. It's like a 3-ring binder, and you have a book of clues, and then a map of Sherlock Holmes's London, and then a pamphlet of newspapers from the late 1800s, and a directory of names of people in London. And so you'll go. You're one of Sherlock Holmes' kind of tag-alongs, and he'll run down the details of a case, and then just kind of say, "Okay, now go." And unlike it's not a mystery game like Clue where you're looking for. There's no deduction really, but from the description he gives you in the case, you have to think, okay, well, I really want to go to the scene of the crime, so let me look up in the directory the last name of the victim. And that'll tell me where in the clue book to go to go look at the scene of the crime. And then you read a paragraph from the clue book which describes the scene of the crime. There'll be some clue in there that you're supposed to pick up and then think, okay, now where do I want to go? Do I want to go to the prison to interrogate the prisoner? Do I want to go to the medical examiner to hear about the details of the body? And you're trying to piece together an actual. It feels like you're playing a mystery. It's not a logic game like something like Clue would be. It's really.
Is it like a make your own adventure book where you go to page 56 and then it tells you to go to page 75?
On a grand scale.
Okay.
In a way that when you play it, you almost can't believe that it works.
Wow. Now you got me.
There's a couple examples where it kind of doesn't.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it does. And there's I think there's 10 cases in the box, and they actually start to build on one another. There are later cases where if you paid attention to what was written in the newspaper 3 cases before, you could get the answer much quicker than if you'd forgotten that.
Right. Very cool. I really want to try that out now. I'm putting that on my list. That sounds awesome. Craig, you've got one that you didn't think about, which is, and I'm totally blanking on the name now. It's a little card game, and as you draw the cards, you got to put them in the order the things actually happen in time.
Oh, Timeline. Those Timeline games are great, yeah.
Those are great for that, right?
And there's a bunch of different categories, so you could do like science or you can do art.
These fall into all these things.
And it's all real stuff.
And literature too, right? Isn't there one on books?
There's a literature one, yep, that's true, yep.
Sam, are you familiar with Timelines?
I love Timeline, and I love that you can combine them.
Yeah,
yes,
right.
Yes.
That's even awesomer. Yeah. Timeline's really cool because it's one of those, this is a game that appeals to everyone, right? Because it's kind of like one of those game shows where you just want to jump in and yell out the answer, right? You're seeing people work with this, and you're like, oh, that's totally, of course, Shakespeare came before, electricity was invented, that kind of thing. You're just shouting it out, but sometimes it gets very subtle. But I love that there's different categories. You can have one specifically around scientific discoveries. You can have one specifically around works of literature, around anything really. So I think Timeline's a great one, and they now it's at the point now where they have something for everyone at this point, right?
Timeline actually ticks all my boxes of a perfect party game too. Now that I think about it,
it really does. We should, in the main show, we should be sure we mention that. If we don't, we're just being silly.
Yes, that is true.
That is an excellent one. So, Sam, thanks. I'm glad we were able to catch up with you here at Dunkin Donuts. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, and so get one more kosher product for the road there, and we will catch up with you next week on the main show.
That will be a blast. I look forward to it.
All right, see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care, guys.
Thanks for purchasing a D6G Lost Chapter. Supporting the show helps it grow.